Hey everyone, this is pinpoints again. I'm a Balbix cyber risk engineer, and in this video, I just wanted to quickly walk you through on how Balbix prioritizes vulnerabilities as well as exposures so organizations can focus on their most critical risks and deprioritize those risks that aren't as critical. So let's go ahead and walk through the console and see how this is done. Firstly, to see all of my different exposures, I got to click into this exposure management tab. And we can see here that Balbix organizes vulnerabilities and exposures into asset-related findings, application-related findings, as well as user-related findings. For the purpose of this video, let's go ahead and drill into asset-related vulnerabilities, specifically all of the vulnerabilities across our devices. When I drill into this tab, I can see that my vulnerabilities are actually organized by exposure score. This is organized in descending order, so I could quickly view what is my most critical risk. In this case, I can see that this CVE 2024-3400 has an exposure score of 86. It also happens to have a CVSS score of 10, an EPSS score of 0.96, and it has several vulnerability tags that highlight to me that this is a CISA known exploit, this is malware linked, ransomware linked, and it's on the OWASP top 10. So let's go ahead and drill into this vulnerability to see how we come up with this exposure score of 86. We can see here that this particular vulnerability was discovered by our Tenable network scan. It affects 10 different assets, which sounds very small, but let's go ahead and drill into why this is critical. When we look at the description, we can see here that this affects our Palo Alto firewalls. Specifically, it's a command injection vulnerability that allows an unauthenticated attacker to execute commands with root privileges on those firewalls. When we drill into the exposure score, we can see again that there's an exposure score of 86. And the reason why there's an exposure score of 86 is because when we look at the impact of compromise as well as the likelihood of compromise, those are very high scores. So let's go into and drill into what goes into the impact of compromise and likelihood of compromise. We can see here that Balbix looks at the different asset attributes from its role all the way to the various asset tags that could be observed, the zone that those assets reside in. There's a vulnerability analysis done that looks at the attack vectors, whether the dependencies are met. We can see here also whether the vulnerability has impact or affects confidentiality, integrity, as well as availability. And then when we look at the likelihood specifically, what constitutes or what contributes to likelihood is attack complexity, the age of those vulnerabilities or the vulnerability, all of those different threat tags that we observed earlier, for example, CISA known exploits, ransomware linked, the overall threatscape and threat chatter, the EPSS score. And finally, what makes Balbix unique is we're also looking at the controls that exist that help mitigate against these particular vulnerabilities. In this case, there's been no BAS validation and no red teaming validation, but we can see here that all of the controls that we have in our environment aren't very effective against mitigating this particular risk and this particular vulnerability. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you found this insightful on how Balbix helps to prioritize risks and vulnerabilities as well as exposures using what we call exposure score. In the next video, we'll dive into this a little bit deeper and see how we account for different scenarios. Until next time, this is Pim signing out. Thank you very much.